On Christmas, I got a card, and my daughter-in-law forced me to read it. Roses are red, violets are blue. We don't want a sick grandma. Christmas is not for you. Everyone laughed at me. The next day, I left the country, and I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The Christmas tree lights blurred through my tears as I held the card in my trembling hands. Red and green glitter fell onto my lap like cruel confetti, and I could barely make out the words through my shock. Roses are red, violets are blue. We don't want a sick grandma. Christmas is not for you. The living room erupted in laughter. My son David's deep chuckle mixed with his wife Zuri's high-pitched giggle, while my daughter-in-law's sister clapped her hands in delight. Even my own grandchildren, Emma and Jake, were snickering behind their hands, though I could see confusion in 10-year-old Emma's eyes. "Oh my God, Zuri, you're terrible!" David gasped between laughs, wiping tears from his eyes. "Mom's face is priceless." I looked up at my 42-year-old son, the boy I had raised alone after his father walked out when he was 12, the same child I had worked double shifts to put through college, who I had supported through his failed business ventures, who I had helped buy this very house we were sitting in. He was looking at me like I was the punchline to a joke he'd been waiting years to hear. Zuri, perched on the arm of David's chair like a queen on her throne, was practically glowing with satisfaction. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her wine glass as she watched my reaction. At 38, she had the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive salons and a life free from real worry. Her blonde hair caught the firelight as she tilted her head, studying me like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. "It's just a joke, Myrtle," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You know we love you. We just think it might be better if you spent the holidays somewhere more appropriate for your condition." My condition. The Parkinson's diagnosis I had shared with them 6 months ago, thinking they would offer support and understanding. Instead, it had become a weapon they used to diminish me, to make me feel like a burden in my own family. "Where exactly would be appropriate?" I asked quietly, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. Zuri exchanged a look with David, one of those married couple communications that excluded everyone else in the room. "Well, there are lovely facilities for people in your situation, places where you could get proper care and be around others who understand what you're going through." The words hit me like physical blows. Facilities, others who understand. She was talking about nursing homes, about shipping me away so I wouldn't embarrass them with my tremors or my occasional stumbles. "I'm managing fine on my own," I said, though my voice shook slightly. "Dr. Martinez says I'm in the early stages. I could have years before I need any kind of specialized care." "But why wait?" Zuri's sister chimed in, her voice bright and helpful. "Prevention is better than cure, right? And honestly, Myrtle, you do seem to be getting worse. Just last week when you came for dinner, you spilled wine on the white carpet." I remembered that evening clearly. I had brought a bottle of expensive Merlot, something I couldn't really afford on my Social Security, because Zuri had mentioned she was having friends over and wanted to impress them. When my hand shook slightly while pouring, a few drops had landed on their pristine carpet. Zuri had made such a production of cleaning it up, sighing and muttering about stains while her friends watched in uncomfortable silence. "That was barely a few drops," I protested. But even as I said it, I could hear how weak and defensive I sounded. "This time," David said, his tone taking on that patronizing quality I had come to dread. "But what about next time? What if you fall and hurt yourself? What if you leave the stove on and burn the house down? We worry about you, Mom." The concern in his voice might have fooled a stranger, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. David had always been good at making his selfishness sound noble, even as a child. When he wanted a new bicycle, it was because the old one was dangerous. When he wanted expensive clothes, it was because the cheap ones would hurt his self-esteem and affect his grades. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. These people, my family, were discussing my future like I wasn't even present. Emma had gone back to playing with her new tablet, already bored by the adult conversation. Jake was building something with his Legos, occasionally glancing up at me with what looked like pity. The Christmas tree dominated one corner of the room, its branches heavy with ornaments I had collected over the years and given to David when he bought this house. My grandmother's angel sat at the top, the same angel that had crowned every Christmas tree of my childhood. Now it felt like a stranger in this foreign place. "I need some air," I said, standing carefully. My legs felt unsteady, though whether from the Parkinson's or the shock of the evening, I couldn't tell. "Of course, Mom," David said, not moving to help me. "Take all the time you need." I walked slowly to the back door, past the kitchen where the remains of Christmas dinner still covered the counters. The dinner I had cooked, despite Zuri's protests that I might contaminate something with my shaking hands. The same dinner they had all devoured while I picked at my plate, my appetite destroyed by the constant stream of helpful suggestions about my future care. The back porch was cold and quiet, a blessed relief from the warmth and noise inside. I could see my breath in small puffs as I gripped the railing, trying to steady myself both physically and emotionally. The card was still in my hand, the glitter now smeared from my sweaty palms. Through the sliding glass door, I could see them resuming their celebration as if nothing had happened. Zuri was showing off her new jewelry, gifts from David that probably cost more than my monthly medication budget. The children were absorbed in their new toys, the awkwardness of the card incident already forgotten. It was then, standing alone in the cold, that I realized something with crystal clarity. I wasn't family to them anymore. I was a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be hidden, a burden to be transferred to someone else's care. The mother who had sacrificed everything to give David a good life had been replaced by a sick old woman who threatened their perfect suburban existence. But what they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that this sick old woman had resources they had never imagined. Resources that had been carefully hidden and accumulated over years of modest living and smart financial decisions. Resources that currently subsidized their comfortable lifestyle in ways they had never bothered to question. The cold air stung my cheeks as I made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted me gone, I would disappear. But not in the way they expected. As I stood there, planning my escape from the family that no longer wanted me, I had no idea that my disappearance would turn their world upside down. They had given me the cruelest Christmas gift possible, the truth about how they really saw me. Now, it was time to give them a gift in return. The morning after Christmas, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold between my hands. The house felt different now, as if the events of the previous evening had shifted something fundamental in its foundation. Every familiar object seemed to mock me. The family photos on the refrigerator, the handmade pot holders Emma had given me for my birthday, the drawing Jake had made of our family where I stood apart from the others, somehow smaller than everyone else. I had barely slept, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The Parkinson's tremor in my left hand seemed more pronounced this morning, though I couldn't tell if it was the progression of the disease or the stress of my decision. Either way, it didn't matter. I had made up my mind. The first step was the hardest, admitting to myself that this wasn't a temporary setback in our relationship. This was who they had become, or perhaps who they had always been beneath the surface politeness. I thought back to Harold's funeral 3 years ago, how David had been more concerned with the cost of the service than with comforting his grieving mother. How Zuri had complained about having to take time off work for the viewing, as if mourning my husband of 42 years was an inconvenience to her schedule. Even then, there had been signs. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room, the subtle eye rolls when I repeated a story, the increasingly infrequent invitations to family events, always with some excuse about space or timing or my comfort level. But Harold's death had changed more than just our family dynamics. It had also revealed financial realities that David and Zuri knew nothing about. Harold had been careful with money in a way that surprised even me after his passing. Conservative investments, a small but valuable collection of rare coins, and a life insurance policy he had never mentioned. Combined with the house we had paid off decades ago and my own modest pension, I found myself in a position I had never expected, financially independent. I had kept this information private, partly out of Harold's instilled habit of discretion, and partly because I had seen what money did to families. David already felt entitled to help with my expenses, often suggesting I should be more careful with my spending when I bought the grandchildren gifts or contributed to family celebrations. If he knew the true extent of my resources, I suspected his suggestions would become demands. Now, as I planned my escape, I was grateful for that secrecy. The kitchen phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. David's name appeared on the caller ID, and I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I played back his message. "Hey, Mom, just checking on you after last night. I know Zuri's joke was a little harsh, but you know how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it. Anyway, we were thinking maybe we could help you look at some of those facilities we mentioned, just to see what's available. You know? No pressure. Call me back." No pressure. As if there hadn't been pressure building for months, each conversation another brick in the wall they were building around me. I deleted the message and turned off the phone. Over the next 3 days, I worked with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I contacted James Morrison, the lawyer who had handled Harold's estate, and scheduled an appointment under the guise of updating my will. James was a kind man in his 70s who had known Harold since childhood, and I trusted him to help me navigate what I needed to do. "Myrtle, I have to ask," James said when I explained what I wanted. "Are you sure about this? It's a significant step, leaving the country at your age, especially with your health concerns." I had told him about the Parkinson's diagnosis and about my family's reaction to it. I didn't mention the Christmas card. That humiliation felt too private to share, even with someone I trusted. "James, I've never been more sure of anything," I replied. "I need to know that my affairs are in order and that my wishes will be respected, regardless of what my family might prefer." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. "Very well. Let's talk about what you need." The logistics were more complex than I had anticipated. I needed to arrange for my medications to be transferred to international prescriptions, find temporary housing in a country with reasonable health care and a lower cost of living, and most importantly, ensure that my financial assets were protected and accessible wherever I decided to settle. Portugal emerged as the ideal destination. The climate would be good for my joints, the healthcare system was excellent, and there was a growing community of American retirees. Most importantly, it was far enough away that casual visits would be impossible, but close enough to civilization that I wouldn't be completely isolated. While I planned my logistics, memories kept surfacing, as if my mind was trying to catalog every slight and disappointment before I left them behind forever. David's graduation from college, where he thanked everyone but me in his speech. Zuri's baby shower, where I had been relegated to kitchen duty while her mother held court with the other guests. The family vacation 2 summers ago, where they had booked a hotel room for Harold and me that was 3 blocks away from theirs, claiming they thought we'd prefer the quiet. Each memory reinforced my decision, but they also brought a deep sadness that settled in my chest like a physical weight. This wasn't how I had imagined my golden years would unfold. I had pictured myself as the beloved grandmother, sharing wisdom and creating memories with Emma and Jake. Instead, I was planning to disappear from their lives before they had a chance to know who I really was. The worst part was realizing that David had been systematically erasing me from family narratives for years. When people asked about his childhood, he talked about his sports achievements and academic success, but never mentioned the mother who worked 2 jobs to pay for those opportunities. When friends commented on his strong work ethic, he credited his own determination, not the example I had set working nights as a hospital aide while going to nursing school during the day. I had become invisible in my own family story, a background character whose contributions were forgotten as soon as they were no longer needed. On December 29th, exactly 4 days after Christmas, I made my first concrete move. I drove to the bank and opened a new account, transferring enough money to fund my relocation while leaving the rest in carefully structured investments that would continue to generate income. The bank manager, Linda Chen, had known me for 15 years and didn't question my decisions, though I could see concern in her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, if you don't mind me asking, is everything all right at home?" she asked as she processed the paperwork. "Everything is exactly as it should be," I replied, which was true in its own way. This was exactly how things needed to be. That evening, I began writing the letter I would leave behind. It needed to explain everything without being cruel, to be honest, without being vindictive. I wanted them to understand why I had left, but I also wanted to protect myself from their inevitable attempts to guilt me into returning. The letter went through 7 drafts before I was satisfied. Each version revealed something different about my state of mind: anger, sadness, disappointment, relief. The final version was calm and factual, laying out the series of events that had led to my decision while avoiding accusations or demands for apologies. As I sealed the envelope, I realized that I felt lighter than I had in months. The decision had been made, the plans were in motion, and for the first time since Harold's death, I was taking control of my own destiny. But what I didn't know, as I prepared for my new life, was that my departure would reveal secrets about our family's financial situation that would shock everyone involved. The modest grandmother they wanted to ship off to a nursing home was about to become the most important person in their lives, just as she disappeared from it forever. January 3rd arrived gray and cold, the kind of winter morning that makes you want to stay buried under blankets. It was perfect for what I needed to do. I had chosen this date carefully, far enough after the holidays that my absence wouldn't be immediately noticed, but soon enough that I could leave while my resolve was still strong. My suitcases sat by the front door, 2 modest pieces of luggage that contained my entire new life. I had been ruthless in my packing, taking only what was essential and leaving behind decades of accumulated possessions. The family photos stayed on the mantel. The china set that had been my mother's remained in the dining room cabinet. Even Harold's reading glasses were still on his nightstand, exactly where he had left them 3 years ago. These weren't my memories anymore. They belonged to a different version of myself, the woman who had believed that family love was unconditional and that sacrifice was always rewarded with gratitude. That woman was staying behind with all her naive hopes and disappointed expectations. At 6:30 a.m., I called a taxi. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen from next door, was already up, as she always was, tending to her small garden despite the cold. I waved to her through the window, knowing it would be the last time. She had been kinder to me in the past 3 years than my own family had been, bringing me soup when I was sick and checking on me during snowstorms. The taxi driver was a young man named Miguel, who helped me load my luggage without asking questions. During the drive to the airport, he chatted about his plans to visit his grandmother in Mexico, and I found myself envying the affection in his voice when he spoke about her. When had David last spoken about me that way? I couldn't remember. At the airport, I felt a moment of panic as the reality of what I was doing hit me. I was 65 years old, leaving everything I had ever known, with a progressive disease that could worsen at any time. For a few seconds, standing in the check-in line with my passport in my shaking hand, I considered turning around and going home. But then I remembered Zuri's satisfied smirk as she watched me read that card. I remembered David's laughter. I remembered feeling like a stranger in my own family, and the panic transformed into determination. The flight to Lisbon was long but peaceful. I had deliberately chosen a seat away from other passengers, needing the time and space to process what I was leaving behind. As the plane lifted off from American soil, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for the future instead of dread. I had left the letter on my kitchen table, weighted down with Harold's favorite coffee mug. It was positioned so that anyone entering through the front door would see it immediately. Along with the letter, I had left a folder containing important documents, medical records, insurance information, and a list of monthly expenses that David had never bothered to ask about. The letter itself was simple and direct. Dear David, Zuri, Emma, and Jake, by the time you read this, I will be beginning a new chapter of my life. The events of Christmas Eve made it clear that my presence in your lives has become more of a burden than a blessing, and I have decided to remove that burden. I want you to know that this decision wasn't made in anger, but out of love. Love for all of you, and love for myself. You deserve to live your lives without worrying about an aging mother who might embarrass you or require care you're not prepared to give. And I deserve to spend my remaining years surrounded by people who value my presence rather than tolerate it. I have arranged for my own care and housing, so please don't worry about my well-being. I am in good health and good spirits, and I'm looking forward to this new adventure. The house and all my possessions remain as they are for now. The folder beside this letter contains information about monthly expenses that you may not have been aware of. James Morrison at Morrison & Associates has all the legal details should you need them. I hope someday you'll understand that this wasn't abandonment. It was liberation for all of us. With love always, Mom. What the letter didn't mention, what they would discover soon enough, was that the monthly expenses I referenced included the mortgage payments on David's house, the property taxes on their vacation cabin, Emma's private school tuition, and the health insurance premiums that covered their entire family. For 3 years, since Harold's death, I had been quietly subsidizing their comfortable lifestyle while they treated me like a charity case. My phone, which I had turned off before boarding the plane, registered the first missed call at 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time. David had stopped by to check on me, probably prompted by Zuri's nagging about my attitude since Christmas. He would have found the house empty, the letter waiting, and the implications slowly sinking in. By the time I landed in Lisbon 12 hours later, my phone showed 53 missed calls and 29 text messages. I scrolled through them as I waited for my luggage, watching the progression from concern to confusion to panic to anger. The first few calls were worried. "Mom, where are you? Please call me back." Then came confusion. "Mom, I found your letter. What do you mean you're starting a new chapter? Where did you go?" Panic set in quickly. "This is insane. Mom, you can't just disappear. What about your medications? What about your condition?" And finally, anger. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't funny. You need to come home right now." The text messages told a similar story, but with additional details that revealed just how quickly their world was falling apart. Zuri had called the mortgage company and discovered that the automatic payments were coming from my account. David had contacted Emma's school only to learn that Grandma Patterson was listed as the tuition payer. Their health insurance company confirmed that Mrs. Myrtle Patterson was the policyholder for the family plan. One text from David, sent at 11:43 p.m., contained more desperation than I had heard from him since he was a teenager. "Mom, please. I'm sorry about Christmas. We all are. Zuri is crying. The kids are asking where you are. Just tell me you're safe and we can work this out." Another, from Zuri herself, was even more revealing. "Myrtle, I know we haven't always gotten along, but this is crazy. David is falling apart. Please just call us back. We can talk about Christmas and figure everything out." Reading their messages, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing that they finally understood my value, but also sadness that it had taken my disappearance for them to realize it. Most importantly, though, I felt relief. For the first time in years, I was the one with the power to choose. My taxi driver in Lisbon was an elderly woman named Sophia, who spoke excellent English and seemed genuinely delighted to help an American woman start a new life in her country. As we drove through the narrow cobblestone streets toward my temporary apartment, she pointed out landmarks and shared stories about her own family. "My grandson visits every Sunday," she said proudly. "He brings his children, and we cook together. Family should be joy, not obligation, yes?" "Yes," I agreed, looking out at the colorful buildings and feeling something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The apartment I had rented was small, but bright, with a balcony overlooking a quiet square where elderly men played chess in the afternoons and children kicked soccer balls in the early evenings. It was exactly what I needed, a place to heal and rediscover who I was without the weight of other people's expectations. That night, as I unpacked my few belongings and arranged my medications on the bathroom counter, I allowed myself to think about what I had left behind. David, Zuri, Emma, and Jake were probably sitting in their living room, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I had helped put up, trying to figure out how to maintain their lifestyle without my financial support. Part of me, the part that had spent 42 years putting David's needs before my own, wanted to call them back and fix everything. But a stronger part, the part that had been born on Christmas Eve when they laughed at my humiliation, knew that some bridges were meant to be burned. I turned off my American phone and plugged in the Portuguese number I had purchased at the airport. My old life was officially unreachable, and my new one was just beginning. Outside my window, The sounds of Lisbon at night created a lullaby I had never heard before. Street musicians playing fado, couples talking softly as they walked home from dinner, the distant sound of trams moving through the city. It was beautiful and foreign and completely mine. For the first time since Harold's death, I fell asleep feeling excited about tomorrow. Back in Connecticut, David sat at his kitchen table at 6 a.m., surrounded by paperwork that painted a picture he had never bothered to examine before. Coffee grew cold beside him as he went through bank statements, insurance policies, and bills that had been automatically paid for years without his knowledge or attention. His hands shook slightly as he held the mortgage statement for their house, the house he had assumed was his responsibility, his achievement. The payment history showed 3 years of consistent payments from an account he didn't recognize, an account that belonged to Myrtle Patterson. His mother, the woman he had been planning to ship off to a nursing home, owned their house. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, pulling up his own bank records on his laptop. His mortgage payments showed up as scheduled transfers, money going out of his account every month like clockwork. But these new statements showed that every single payment was being refunded from his mother's account within 24 hours. For 3 years, she had been quietly reversing every mortgage payment he made, covering their housing costs while letting him believe he was the responsible homeowner. Zuri appeared in the doorway, still in her robe, her face puffy from crying and lack of sleep. "Did you find her?" "She's not answering any of her phones," David said without looking up. "But I found something else." He handed her the insurance documents. "Look at this. Our health insurance, the kids' coverage, even your dental plan. It's all under her name. She's the policy holder." Zuri sank into the chair beside him, the papers trembling in her hands. "That's impossible. We pay for our own insurance. It comes out of your paycheck." "No, it doesn't." David pulled up his payroll records on the screen. "Look, there's a deduction labeled health insurance, but the amount is 0. It's been 0 for 3 years. The revelation hit them both like a physical blow. Zuri set down the papers and buried her face in her hands. "Oh God, David, what did we do?" Before he could answer, their daughter Emma appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for school despite the early hour. At 10 years old, she had inherited her father's sharp intelligence and her mother's intuitive understanding of adult emotions. She had been listening from the hallway. "Is Grandma Myrtle really gone?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. David looked at his daughter and felt a stab of guilt that went deeper than the financial revelations. Emma had always been fond of her grandmother, despite the subtle discouragement from Zuri about spending too much time with sick old people. Now he realized that Myrtle's absence would hurt Emma in ways he hadn't considered. "She's taking a trip, sweetheart," Zuri said, though her voice lacked conviction. "She'll be back." Emma studied her parents with the unblinking directness of childhood. "She heard you laughing at her card, didn't she? I saw her face. She looked like I did when Tommy Morrison called me stupid at recess." The comparison was devastating in its simplicity. David had comforted Emma through that incident, had called the school and demanded action against the bully. Now he realized that he and Zuri had been the bullies in their own home, and their victim had been his own mother. "It's more complicated than that, Em," he said weakly. "No, it's not," Emma replied with the brutal honesty of children. "You were mean to her, and now she's gone." After Emma left for school, David and Zuri continued their archaeological dig through their financial life, each discovery more shocking than the last. The vacation cabin in Vermont that they used every summer and had assumed was a family inheritance, purchased and maintained by Myrtle. The private school tuition for Emma and Jake, paid by an education fund Myrtle had established. Even their car payments were being supplemented by monthly transfers from her accounts. "Jesus Christ," David whispered, looking at a 3-year summary that James Morrison had provided. "She's been spending almost $4,000 a month on us. $4,000, Zuri, every month." Zuri was crying again, but this time her tears came with the terrible understanding of what they had lost. "The nursing home," she said through her sobs. "We wanted to put her in a nursing home, and she was paying for our entire life." The phone rang, and David grabbed it desperately, hoping it was his mother. Instead, it was the mortgage company, following up on Zuri's call from the previous day about the automatic payments. "Mr. Patterson? This is Janet from First National. I wanted to clarify the situation with your mortgage payments. As I mentioned to your wife yesterday, the account holder for your automatic payments is listed as Myrtle Patterson. If she's removed from the account, or if the payments stop for any reason, you'll need to make alternative arrangements immediately. David felt his stomach drop. What kind of alternative arrangements? Well, your next payment is due February 1st. That's $2,147. If Mrs. Patterson is no longer handling the payments, you'll need to ensure we receive that amount by the due date to avoid late fees and potential default proceedings. After hanging up, David stared at his bank balance on the laptop screen. After Christmas expenses and holiday bonuses for their cleaning lady and babysitter, they had $100 and $200 in checking and maybe another $800 in savings. Without his mother's support, they couldn't even make their next mortgage payment. We have to find her, Zuri said, her voice desperate. We have to bring her home. And say what? David snapped, his guilt transforming into anger as it always did when he felt cornered. Sorry we treated you like garbage, but please keep paying our bills? Maybe if we apologize. Apologize for what? For the joke? For wanting what was best for her? But even as he said it, David knew he was lying to himself. The Christmas card had been cruel, but it was just the latest in a long series of signals they had sent his mother about her place in their family. The separate hotel room on vacation, the comments about her condition, the way they talked around her as if she wasn't present, the gradual exclusion from family decisions and conversations. James Morrison arrived at 10 a.m., carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who had seen this scenario play out before. He was in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but his demeanor was all business. David, Zuri, he said, settling into their living room. I assume you've had time to review the documents your mother left. Where is she, James? David demanded. This is insane. She can't just disappear. James studied him calmly. Your mother is a competent adult with no legal restrictions on her movement. She can go wherever she chooses. But her condition, her Parkinson's is mild and well managed. She's perfectly capable of traveling and living independently. Zuri leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. James, we know we made mistakes. The Christmas thing was just a joke that went too far. We never meant to hurt her. I'm not here to judge anyone's family dynamics, James replied diplomatically. I'm here to discuss the practical implications of your mother's departure. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Your mother has been supporting your household financially for 3 years. The total amount is approximately $144,000, not including the down payment she made on this house when you purchased it. David felt the room spin slightly. Down payment? $80,000 in 2018. Without it, you wouldn't have qualified for your mortgage. The number hung in the air like an accusation. David tried to remember the house buying process, but it had been such a whirlwind of paperwork and signatures. He remembered his mother being there, remembered her insisting on contributing, but he had assumed it was a small gift, maybe a few $1,000s. So what happens now? Zuri asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James's expression softened slightly. That depends on your mother. She's asked me to manage her affairs while she's away, which includes the various payments she's been making on your behalf. Are they going to continue? David asked, hating the desperate hope in his own voice. For now, yes. She doesn't want you to face immediate financial hardship, especially with the children involved. But this arrangement isn't permanent. Relief flooded through David, followed immediately by shame. His mother, the woman they had humiliated and driven away, was still protecting them even in her absence. There is one condition, James continued. She wants to hear from Emma and Jake. Not from you or Zuri, but from the children. She misses her grandchildren. The request was like a knife to David's heart. His mother wanted to maintain contact with Emma and Jake, but not with him. He had lost not just her financial support, but her love. After James left, David and Zuri sat in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their dependence on a woman they had treated as a burden. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights now seeming to mock rather than celebrate. What are we going to do? Zuri asked. David looked around their beautiful home, filled with furniture they couldn't afford and maintained by money they hadn't earned. Everything they had built their life around was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion funded by the woman they had been planning to abandon. "I don't know," he admitted. "I really don't know." Outside, snow began to fall, covering their perfect suburban street in white. Somewhere in the world, his mother was starting a new life without them, and for the first time, David wondered if she was better off alone. 3 months had passed since I arrived in Lisbon, and I barely recognized myself. The woman who had cowered under her family's disapproval had been replaced by someone I was still getting to know, someone who woke up each morning excited about the day ahead instead of dreading what new ways she might disappoint the people she loved. My apartment in the Alfama district had become a sanctuary. The narrow, winding streets that had initially seemed confusing now felt like a protective maze, shielding me from my old life. Every morning, I opened my windows to let in the sound of the trams and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery below. Mrs. Santos, the baker's wife, had taken to saving me a warm pastel de nata each morning, and our broken conversations in mixed English and Portuguese had become the highlight of my day. My Parkinson's symptoms had actually improved since leaving Connecticut. Dr. Oliveira, my new neurologist, attributed it to reduced stress and increased physical activity. The steep hills of Lisbon forced me to walk more than I had in years, and the Mediterranean diet, combined with my newfound peace of mind, had given me energy I thought I'd lost forever. But the most unexpected part of my new life had nothing to do with my health or living situation. It had to do with Maria. I met her at the small cafe near my apartment, where I had taken to spending my afternoons reading English books and practicing Portuguese phrases. Maria was there every Tuesday and Thursday with her granddaughter Anna, a shy 7-year-old who reminded me painfully of Emma at that age. The first time I saw them together, Maria struggling to help Anna with homework while managing 3 other grandchildren, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. "Excuse me," I had said in my careful Portuguese, "but would you like some help?" Maria looked up, surprised, but not unfriendly. Her English was better than my Portuguese, and within minutes we were chatting like old friends. Anna was having trouble with mathematics, and before I knew it, I was sitting beside her, showing her the same tricks I had taught David when he was her age. That afternoon led to another, and another. Soon, I was helping not just Anna, but several children whose grandparents gathered at the cafe each week. These were working families, parents who couldn't afford private tutoring, grandparents who provided childcare while trying to stretch modest pensions. In many ways, they reminded me of my own younger self, stretched thin but determined to give their children every opportunity. "You are teacher?" Maria asked one day as I helped her grandson Carlos with his English pronunciation. "I was a nurse," I replied, "but I helped my son with his studies when he was young." "You have good patience with children," she observed. "They like you." It was true. The children had taken to calling me Avó Americana, American grandmother, and they genuinely seemed to enjoy our afternoon sessions. For the first time in years, I felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with money. The transformation in my daily routine was remarkable. Instead of sitting alone in my house in Connecticut, watching television and waiting for phone calls that rarely came, I was surrounded by laughter and learning. The children's English improved rapidly under my guidance, and my Portuguese grew stronger through our constant chatter. But my peace was disrupted one evening in late March when my Portuguese phone rang with an international call. I had given this number only to James Morrison, with strict instructions that it was for emergencies only. "Myrtle," James's voice sounded tired. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we need to talk." My stomach clenched. "Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that. But David and Zuri have been persistent. They've hired a private investigator to find you." I sank into my chair, feeling the old familiar weight of anxiety settling on my chest. "What kind of investigator?" "Someone who specializes in locating missing persons. They've been calling my office daily, demanding information about your whereabouts. I've told them I can't and won't reveal anything, but they're getting desperate." "Desperate enough to do what?" James paused. "They've been to the police, claiming you're mentally incompetent due to your condition. They want to have you declared a missing person in need of assistance." The betrayal cut deep, even though I should have expected it. They weren't looking for me out of love or concern. They were looking for me because they needed their benefactor back. Can they do that legally? Not easily. You left of your own free will, you're in contact with your attorney, and you've demonstrated competency in managing your affairs, but they could make things complicated. I looked out my window at the square below, where children were playing soccer in the fading evening light. This was my life now, my peace, and I wouldn't let them destroy it. James, I need you to do something for me. Of course. I want to establish a trust fund for Emma and Jake's education, something that can't be touched by David or Zuri, that goes directly to the children when they turn 18. That's very generous. Considering the circumstances. They're still my grandchildren, I said softly. This isn't their fault. And the monthly payments to David's household? I had been dreading this decision, but the news about the private investigator made it easier. Reduce them by half, effective immediately. Tell them it's because my own medical expenses have increased due to my condition. It wasn't entirely a lie. Dr. Oliveira had recommended some new treatments that weren't covered by Portuguese healthcare, though they were hardly expensive. But David and Zuri didn't need to know that. Myrtle, James said carefully, they're going to push harder when they realize the money is decreasing. Are you prepared for that? Let them push, I replied, surprised by the steel in my own voice. I'm not the same woman who left Connecticut. After hanging up, I sat in my small living room, processing what James had told me. The idea that David would try to have me declared incompetent was more hurtful than I had expected. Even now, even after everything they had discovered about my financial contributions to their life, he still saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. The next morning, I threw myself into my routine with the children with renewed energy. Anna was struggling with a story she had to write for school, and I found myself sharing memories of my own childhood, stories I hadn't thought about in years. My grandmother used to tell me that every person has many different lives inside them, I told Anna as we worked on her essay. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to start a new one. Anna looked up at me with serious dark eyes. Did you start a new life, Avo Americana? Yes, sweetheart, I did. Are you happy in your new life? The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? For months, I had been so focused on not being miserable that I hadn't stopped to consider whether I was actually happy. I looked around the cafe, at Maria knitting in the corner while keeping one eye on her grandchildren, at Carlos practicing English words under his breath, at Anna waiting patiently for my answer. These people had welcomed me into their lives without expecting anything in return, except friendship and the occasional help with homework. Yes, I said, realizing it was true. I am happy. That evening, I video called Emma and Jake for the first time since leaving Connecticut. James had arranged it through a secure connection, and seeing their faces on the screen brought tears to my eyes. Emma looked older, more serious than I remembered. Grandma Myrtle, are you ever coming home? I am home, sweetheart, I said gently. This is where I live now. Jake, at 8 years old, was more direct. Mom says you're sick and can't take care of yourself, but you look fine to me. I am fine, Jake. I'm taking very good care of myself. Are you mad at us? Emma asked, and I could hear the worry in her voice. Oh, sweetheart, no. I'm not mad at you. I love you both very much. Then why did you leave? It was a question I had been dreading, but looking at their faces, I realized they deserved an honest answer, one appropriate for their ages. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about how to live their lives, I said carefully. I needed to be in a place where I could be happy and healthy, and that place isn't in Connecticut anymore. Will we ever see you again? Emma asked, and the hope in her voice nearly broke my heart. I hope so someday. When you're older, maybe you can come visit me here. Portugal is a beautiful country. After ending the call, I sat on my balcony and watched the sunset paint the Lisbon skyline in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere across the ocean, David and Zuri were probably planning their next move, trying to figure out how to get their money source back. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt truly free. I had found a new family in the most unexpected place. people who valued my presence without calculating its worth. I had discovered that happiness didn't require sacrifice, that love shouldn't come with conditions, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't deserve you. Tomorrow, I would wake up to the sound of the trams and the smell of fresh bread. I would help Anna with her mathematics and laugh at Carlos's jokes. I would be useful and appreciated and loved, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. And that, I realized, was everything I had ever really wanted. 6 months after my departure, they found me. I was sitting in my usual spot at the cafe, helping Anna with her English pronunciation, when I noticed a man at the corner table who didn't belong. He was too well dressed for the neighborhood, too obviously American, and he was watching me with the focused attention of someone who had been looking for a long time. "Avo Americana," Anna whispered, following my gaze. "Who is that man?" "Someone from my old life," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's okay, sweetheart. Why don't you go sit with your grandmother for a moment?" The man approached as Anna scurried away, and I could see now that he was younger than I had initially thought, probably in his 30s, with the kind of earnest face that suggested he took his job seriously. "Mrs. Patterson? I'm Detective Ryan Walsh, private investigator. Your son hired me to find you." I set down my coffee cup carefully, buying myself time to think. "I'm not missing, Mr. Walsh. I'm exactly where I choose to be." "Yes, ma'am, I understand that. But your family is very concerned about your welfare. They'd like to speak with you." "My family has my attorney's contact information. If they want to communicate with me, they can go through proper channels." Detective Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, are you here under your own free will? Are you being coerced or manipulated by anyone?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. "Mr. Walsh, for the first time in years, no one is coercing or manipulating me. That's exactly why I'm here. Your son is very worried about your medical condition. He says you have Parkinson's disease and might not be thinking clearly." Now I did laugh, a sound that attracted the attention of Maria and several other regulars. "My medical condition is being excellently managed by Portuguese doctors, thank you. And my thinking has never been clearer." Detective Walsh pulled out his phone. "Would you be willing to speak with your son? He's been very worried." I considered refusing, but something in the detective's earnest expression made me reconsider. Maybe it was time for one final conversation. One last attempt to make David understand that this wasn't a phase or a breakdown. It was a choice. "Very well," I said. "But here, in public, with you as witness." Walsh dialed, and within moments, David's voice was coming through the speaker, tight with emotion and barely controlled anger. "Mom, Jesus Christ, Mom. What the hell are you doing? I'm living my life, David. In Portugal? You don't speak Portuguese. You don't know anyone there. What if something happens to you?" I looked around the cafe, at Maria knitting peacefully in the corner, at the children doing homework at nearby tables, at Mrs. Santos waving to me from behind the counter. "I know plenty of people here, David, and my Portuguese is improving every day. This is insane, Mom. You can't just run away from your family." "I didn't run away from my family," I said calmly. "I walked away from people who made me feel unwelcome in my own life." There was a pause, and then Zuri's voice came on the line, high-pitched with desperation. "Myrtle, please. We're sorry about Christmas. We know the joke went too far, but you can't punish us forever." "This isn't punishment, Zuri. This is me choosing happiness over obligation." "But the kids miss you. Emma cries about you every night." The emotional manipulation was so transparent that I felt nothing but pity. "Emma and Jake have my contact information. They can call me anytime they want. You're the ones who haven't been allowing it." Detective Walsh was watching this exchange with growing understanding, and I could see in his expression that he was beginning to realize this wasn't a case of an elderly woman being taken advantage of. David's voice came back, rougher now. "Fine, Mom. You want to play games? Two can play. I'm having you declared mentally incompetent. I'm getting guardianship. I'll drag you back here if I have to." The threat hung in the air like a poison cloud, but instead of feeling afraid, I felt a cold, clear anger that I had never experienced before. "David," I said, my voice deadly quiet, "if you try that, You will discover exactly how competent I really am. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at Detective Walsh, who was now openly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. It means that for 3 years I have been supporting your family financially while you treated me like a burden. It means that I have documentation of every payment, every contribution, every sacrifice I made for people who couldn't even be bothered to include me in their Christmas photo. You're our mother. It's your job to help us. No, David. It was my choice to help you, and now it's my choice to stop. I could hear Zuri whispering frantically in the background, probably realizing where this conversation was heading. Mr. Walsh, I said, addressing the detective directly, I'd like you to witness what I'm about to say. David, effective immediately, I am ending all financial support for your household. The mortgage assistance, the insurance payments, the children's school tuition, all of it stops today. The silence on the other end was deafening. You can't do that, David finally said, but his voice had lost its authority. I absolutely can. James Morrison has already prepared the paperwork. The only exception is the education trust I've established for Emma and Jake, which you cannot access under any circumstances. Mom, please, I'm not finished. If you attempt to have me declared incompetent, if you send any more investigators to harass me, if you try in any way to force me to return to Connecticut, I will donate every penny of my remaining assets to charity. You will inherit nothing, receive nothing, and have no claim on anything I own. Detective Walsh was staring at me with something approaching awe, and I realized he was seeing the real me for the first time. Not the confused elderly woman David had described, but a sharp, determined person who had simply reached the end of her tolerance for disrespect. Furthermore, I continued, if you truly believe I'm mentally incompetent, then by your own logic, every financial decision I made regarding your family over the past 3 years was invalid. I'm sure my attorney would be very interested in discussing restitution. The threat was effective because it was legally sound. If David wanted to claim I wasn't competent to make decisions about my own life, then he would have to admit that I hadn't been competent to give him money either. This is blackmail, he said weakly. No, David. This is consequences. For the first time in your life, you're facing the actual consequences of treating someone badly. Zuri's voice came back on the line, crying now. Myrtle, we're going to lose the house. We can't afford the payments without your help. Then you should have thought of that before you laughed at my humiliation. I handed the phone back to Detective Walsh, who was looking at me with new respect. Detective Walsh, as you can see, I am of sound mind and body. I am here by choice. I am happy here. And I have no intention of returning to Connecticut. I trust you'll report that to your client. Walsh nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I think I have everything I need. After he left, I sat in the cafe for a long time, processing what had just happened. Maria approached cautiously, concern written across her weathered face. Tudo bem, minha amiga? She asked in Portuguese. Are you okay, my friend? Sim, I replied, and realized it was true. Estou bem. I am fine. That evening, I called James Morrison to confirm the financial arrangements I had announced during the phone call. Within 24 hours, every automatic payment to David's household had been canceled. The life they had built on my sacrifices was officially over. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Emma, written in her careful 10-year-old handwriting. Dear Grandma Myrtle, Dad says we have to move to a smaller house because money is tight. He seems really sad all the time now. Mom cries a lot. I don't understand what happened, but I want you to know that I never thought you were sick or weird. I always liked it when you came to visit. I hope you're happy in Portugal. Maybe someday I can see you again. Love, Emma. P.S. Jake says hi, and he misses your cookies. The letter broke my heart and healed it at the same time. My grandchildren still loved me. And someday, when they were old enough to understand, I would explain why I had to leave. Maybe they would even forgive me for choosing my own happiness over their security. 6 months later, Anna brought me a school project she had written about special people in our community. She had written about me, describing how I had helped her learn English and mathematics, how I had taught her that it was possible to start over no matter how old you were. You are family to us now. Avo Americana, she said, as I read her essay with tears in my eyes. And she was right. These children, This community had become my family in ways that blood had never guaranteed. They loved me not for what I could provide, but for who I was. They included me not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. I was 65 years old, living in a foreign country with a progressive disease, and I had never been happier. I had discovered that family isn't defined by genetics or guilt, but by mutual respect and genuine care. I had learned that sacrifice should be voluntary, not demanded, and that love shouldn't come with conditions. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to start over, to choose yourself, to walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives. As I sat on my balcony that evening, watching the sunset paint Lisbon in shades of gold, I thought about the Christmas card that had changed everything. "We don't want a sick grandma," it had said, and in the end, they had been absolutely right. They didn't want a sick grandma, they wanted a healthy bank account. They didn't want me, they wanted what I could give them, but I wanted something different for myself. I wanted to be valued, appreciated, loved for who I was rather than what I could provide. And in a small cafe in Alfama, surrounded by children who called me their American grandmother, I had found exactly that. The phone calls from Connecticut stopped coming. David and Zuri had finally realized that their threats were empty, and their pleas fell on deaf ears. I had made my choice, and no amount of guilt or manipulation could undo it. For the first time since Harold's death, I was truly free. And freedom, I had discovered, was the most beautiful gift I could have given myself. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites. And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.